Today, we are going to look at the last footage of people eaten alive by animals, from a pet owner who illegally imported vipers to a maintenance worker whose unlucky discovery cost him everything. It was April 7, 2016, and the small private lab operated out of a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Tucson. The equipment was minimal and suited only for small-scale venom handling, lacking the layered safety systems found in regulated facilities. The workbenches held a sparse but functional set of tools for basic venom processing and storage, reflecting the limitations of a privately run operation. The desert landscape outside provided the perfect isolation for Dr. Nathan Blackwood's controversial venom research. Dr. Nathan Blackwood had a steady research background in venom studies, but colleagues' notes and internal emails repeatedly documented his habit of ignoring routine safety steps. At 43, he was experienced but known for cutting corners, often dismissing standard procedures as unnecessary or too slow. Nathan's privately funded laboratory allowed him to work without the oversight and safety requirements that governed university research facilities. He often worked alone during evening hours, preferring the solitude that allowed him to focus on his experiments without interruption. His recent attempts to isolate specific venom proteins had made him even more confident in his abilities and more dismissive of safety measures. Nathan prepared to extract venom from a large western diamondback rattlesnake delivered earlier that week, a specimen measuring a little over 4 feet, and his intake notes recorded repeated coiling, loud rattling, and striking at the transfer hook during housing. His lab journals showed he had been working through the afternoon, consuming several cups of coffee and rushing to test a new extraction method. Recent entries documented multiple instances of him skipping standard restraint tools, noting he believed they slowed his workflow. The journals also showed an increasing pattern of working alone and bypassing safety steps, a trend colleagues had previously warned him about before he left institutional research. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are among North America's most dangerous venomous serpents, with adult specimens capable of delivering massive doses of potent hemotoxic venom. These aggressive pit vipers can strike with lightning speed across distances up to 2/3 of their body length, and their heat-sensing organs allow them to target warm-blooded prey with deadly accuracy. Their venom can cause severe tissue destruction, internal bleeding, and progressive circulatory failure without timely medical treatment. Even experienced handlers treat these snakes with extreme caution, using specialized equipment and safety protocols developed through decades of research. Nathan had decided to test his theory about venom extraction efficiency by milking the rattlesnake directly without using the standard restraint equipment that other researchers considered essential. He believed his superior reflexes and understanding of snake behavior would allow him to handle the specimen safely using only his bare hands, a practice he had noted in his journals as an attempt to streamline procedures. The large western diamondback had been stressed by its recent capture and transport, making it even more defensive and unpredictable than usual. Nathan approached the snake's enclosure with characteristic overconfidence, moving closer despite the snake displaying the same defensive behaviors noted during intake. When Nathan reached into the enclosure to grasp the rattlesnake behind its head, the animal's response was instantaneous. The snake's powerful muscles coiled, and it struck with explosive force, its fangs hitting Nathan's dominant hand before he could react. It delivered a fast strike and release, injecting a substantial amount of venom in a single, clean contact. Phone logs and the incomplete emergency call indicated he recognized the seriousness of the bite based on how abruptly the call ended, but investigators noted that no antivenom was stored on site, likely due to cost and storage requirements, rather than any regulated mandate. The isolated location of his laboratory meant emergency medical services would require time to reach him, time his worsening condition would not allow. Nathan's attempts to call for help became increasingly ineffective as his motor function deteriorated under the effects of the envenomation. The hemotoxic venom caused rapid swelling at the bite site and early signs of circulatory stress consistent with a severe envenomation. him. Without antivenom or immediate medical care, his condition worsened steadily before responders could reach the site. His own research notes, scattered across his laboratory bench, documented his dismissive attitude toward the safety protocols that might have saved his life. Investigators used the timestamp on his last recorded instrument activity and the abrupt end of the emergency call to estimate when he likely collapsed. A contracted building maintenance worker discovered Nathan's body the next morning during a routine check of the property. The investigation revealed his reckless approach to handling dangerous specimens and his failure to maintain basic safety equipment. The rattlesnake had escaped through the partially unlatched enclosure door, but was secured by responders during the initial scene assessment. Local authorities documented several safety deficiencies within the lab during the investigation, noting them in the final incident report. It was September 19th, 2014, and the humid evening air of Miami hung heavy with the promise of another tropical storm as residents of an apartment complex settled into their weekend routines. The three-story building, home to young professionals and working families, buzzed with the sounds of televisions, conversations, and air conditioning units working overtime against the oppressive heat. In apartment 2B, Carlos Mendoza was preparing for what he hoped would be an impressive evening with a woman he had met at a local bar. Carlos Mendoza had been working construction in South Florida for 8 years, building a reputation as a reliable worker who wasn't afraid of dangerous jobs or long hours in challenging conditions. At 26, the Guatemalan native had established himself in Miami's competitive construction industry, but friends and co-workers later told investigators he had a habit of taking unnecessary risks, both at work and at home. 2 months earlier, during a construction project in Honduras, Carlos had encountered a local animal dealer who convinced him to purchase what the man described as an exotic but manageable pet snake. The dealer had downplayed the extreme danger of the fer de lance, describing it as just another tropical serpent that would make an impressive conversation piece for Carlos's Miami apartment. Carlos had successfully smuggled the highly venomous snake back to Florida, keeping it hidden in a converted aquarium in his bedroom closet. His knowledge of snake care came entirely from YouTube videos and online forums where he had absorbed dangerously incomplete information about handling venomous species. His 2 months of successful feeding had convinced him that the snake was as docile and manageable as the internet sources had suggested. According to the wildlife officer who examined the enclosure, the snake showed signs of chronic stress, including dehydration and poor muscle tone. The cramped aquarium lacked proper temperature and humidity, and investigators noted Carlos had been intermittently using a space heater and misting the tank, which kept the snake alive but highly stressed. Recent feedings showed persistent defensive behavior, leading specialists to conclude it had been increasingly reactive for weeks. Fer de lance snakes are among the most dangerous venomous serpents in the Western Hemisphere, responsible for more human fatalities than any other snake species in their native range. These aggressive pit vipers possess potent hemotoxic venom that can cause rapid tissue destruction, severe internal bleeding, and progressive circulatory failure. Adult specimens can reach lengths of over 6 feet and are documented as highly defensive when confined or stressed, especially in inadequate enclosures. Their heat-sensing capabilities and lightning-fast strike speed make them formidable predators that even experienced herpetologists handle with extreme caution. That evening, Carlos had been drinking beer while preparing his apartment for his date's arrival. His alcohol consumption had further impaired his already poor judgment regarding the dangerous animal he kept hidden in his bedroom. He decided that showing off his exotic pet would be the perfect way to impress his guest and demonstrate his adventurous nature. Carlos approached the enclosure with the same overconfidence he'd shown during feedings, unaware of how quickly a fer de lance can strike at close range. When Carlos reached into the enclosure, investigators later concluded, based on blood spatter on the tank's interior lip and the position of pooled blood near the enclosure, that the fer de lance struck at very close range. The 6-foot serpent delivered a significant unvenomation, supported by the rapid swelling documented at the scene and the depth of the wound noted in medical reports. The bite pattern and tissue damage indicated indicated brief contact, a behavior herpetology consultants said is consistent with high-volume envenomation in stressed pit vipers. The potent hemotoxic venom caused rapid tissue damage at the bite site and early signs of circulatory instability, progressing quickly as his condition deteriorated. Carlos managed to call 911, but his deteriorating condition and panic made it impossible for him to coherently explain what had bitten him. According to the call transcript, the dispatcher struggled to interpret his fragmented phrases and slurred descriptions of the animal and his worsening condition. Paramedics arrived to find Carlos in severe shock, his arm grotesquely swollen and his vital signs rapidly declining. The fer-de-lance venom had caused severe internal bleeding and progressive circulatory failure that proved impossible to reverse. Carlos went into cardiac arrest during transport. Despite prolonged resuscitation attempts, he was pronounced dead later that night at the hospital. The discovery of the illegal fer-de-lance in Carlos's apartment prompted wildlife officers to add the incident to ongoing case files in South Florida. His death underscored how dangerous unregulated ownership of venomous wildlife can be, especially when the species involved is capable of delivering a fatal bite. It was April 12, 2017, and the rolling limestone hills of the Texas Hill Country stretched under the warm spring sun, their oak woodlands and rocky canyons glowing with fresh color after recent rains. The region's scattered creeks and shaded ravines supported a wide range of wildlife adapted to Central Texas's shifting seasons. Spring storms had triggered a vibrant burst of wildflower blooms, turning normally muted terrain into a photographer's paradise. Rebecca Torres had driven from Austin specifically to capture images of the spring wildflowers that bloomed so rarely in this harsh environment. At 31, the graphic designer had built a reputation for stunning nature photography that provided both artistic fulfillment and escape from her demanding corporate job. Her weekend hiking trips had become essential stress relief, allowing her to disconnect from technology and reconnect with the natural world. Rebecca possessed basic knowledge of desert wildlife from her years of hiking in Texas, but her experience was limited to more common species found in accessible areas. She had never encountered a venomous snake in the wild and had developed a false sense of security based on her previous hiking experiences in less dangerous environments. That morning, Rebecca had hiked several miles along one of the hill country's lesser-used trails, following reports of exceptional wildflower displays in areas rarely visited by casual tourists. The recent rains had created ideal conditions for both wildflower growth and increased reptile activity, as snakes and small mammals moved closer to the surface to take advantage of the moisture. Western coral snakes are among the most venomous serpents in North America, possessing potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes progressive paralysis. These small, colorful snakes are often confused with harmless species due to their distinctive red, yellow, and black banding pattern. Despite their typically reclusive nature, coral snakes can deliver dangerous bites when handled or accidentally contacted, and their venom typically causes respiratory failure within 8 to 24 hours of envenomation. Their small fangs and secretive behavior often result in bites going unnoticed until serious symptoms develop. While photographing a cluster of bright yellow wildflowers, likely Engelmann daisies, Rebecca noticed a brightly colored snake partially exposed among the flowers, likely displaced from cover by recent rains and increased surface activity. The serpent's bright red, yellow, and black bands created a striking contrast against the golden blooms, and Rebecca immediately recognized the potential for an award-winning photograph. Rebecca approached the snake slowly, and investigators later concluded she had likely misidentified it as a harmless species based on her close camera positioning in the photos. She used a small stick to nudge the surrounding vegetation, unintentionally disturbing the snake as she tried to improve the lighting for her shot. The serpent remained coiled in place, a posture herpetology consultants later described as consistent with a disturbed but non-aggressive coral snake. As Rebecca adjusted her camera position, investigators later concluded, based on faint puncture or scrape marks on her finger and the final images on her camera, that she had come into accidental contact with the coral snake's head. Bite marks from coral snakes can be subtle or easily missed, so the photographs were critical to establishing proximity. The wound characteristics suggested the snake made brief contact and may have worked its small, fixed fangs in a short chewing motion before retreating, a known envenomation behavior for elapid coral snakes when disturbed at close range. Camera timestamps showed she continued photographing the area for several minutes afterward, unaware she had sustained a bite. Because coral snake marks can be minimal, investigators relied on the images, timestamps, and later symptoms to link the exposure to her decline. She then spent several more hours photographing other wildflower sites along the trail, still unaware that the venom had entered her system. The coral snake's venom worked gradually, initially causing no noticeable symptoms as she hiked to other wildflower locations throughout the morning. By late afternoon, early symptoms, fatigue and weakness, appeared, which she assumed were due to dehydration and heat exposure from the long hike. As evening approached, the neurotoxic effects became more pronounced, causing difficulty with coordination and speech that made hiking back to her vehicle increasingly challenging. The coral snake venom caused progressive paralysis that eventually affected Rebecca's respiratory system during the night, making it impossible for her to call for emergency assistance. Her cell phone showed no signal in the remote area, and her weakening condition had prevented her from reaching her vehicle before collapsing. Local search and rescue teams discovered Rebecca's body 2 days later when she failed to check out of her reserved campsite. Her camera contained the final photographs she had taken, showing her close proximity to the coral snake and documenting the moments leading up to her fatal encounter. The images provided valuable evidence for the investigation and served as a reminder of the hidden dangers present in seemingly peaceful natural settings. The investigation confirmed her cause of death as respiratory failure resulting from an untreated coral snake envenomation. Rangers recovered her camera beside her body, and the final sequence of images helped establish how close she had been to the snake before the bite. The case was later incorporated into seasonal safety briefings, emphasizing proper wildlife identification and the risks of approaching animals for photography. It was August 3rd, 2015, and the Orlando Convention Center buzzed with the controlled chaos of the Southeast Reptile Expo, one of the largest gatherings of snake enthusiasts, breeders, and dealers in the region. Hundreds of vendors had set up elaborate displays showcasing everything from harmless corn snakes to exotic venomous species that commanded premium prices from experienced collectors. The air conditioning struggled against the combined heat of thousands of visitors and hundreds of warming lamps, creating a humid atmosphere that reminded everyone of the tropical origins of many displayed species. Vincent Russo, known throughout the reptile community simply as Vinny, had been working the exotic animal trade for 15 years, building a reputation as someone who could acquire almost any species for the right price. At 39, he operated on the fringes of legality, often selling dangerous species to inexperienced buyers who were attracted by his aggressive sales tactics and willingness to overlook proper documentation and safety requirements. Vinny's business model relied on cutting corners wherever possible to maximize profits, a practice that extended to his handling procedures and safety equipment. Witnesses at previous expos had observed him rushing through transactions and skipping proper protocols when he thought he could get away with it, according to investigation notes gathered after the incident. That afternoon, Vinny was managing multiple high-value transactions simultaneously, including the sale of a monocled cobra to a collector who had been waiting months for the opportunity to acquire such a rare specimen. The buyer had traveled from Georgia specifically for this purchase and had expressed urgency about completing the transaction before other dealers could interfere. Monocled cobras are among Asia's most dangerous venomous snakes, possessing potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and can cause respiratory failure within hours. These large serpents can reach lengths of over 6 feet and are known for their defensive hood display and readiness to bite when threatened. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause progressive paralysis, and bites from large specimens can prove fatal without immediate medical intervention and appropriate anti-venom treatment. The busy expo environment had created additional stress for many of the animals on display, and several vendors reported seeing the monocled cobra making restless movements inside its transport container throughout the afternoon. Several handlers noted brief hooding and repeated repositioning inside the container, behavior consistent with a stressed and defensive cobra. Others later told investigators that Vinny had been rushing to complete multiple high-value sales before closing time, moving quickly between transactions while ignoring the usual safety precautions he was known to skip when the expo was busy. Instead of using the proper hooks and restraint equipment that experienced handlers considered essential for transferring venomous species, Vinny decided to save time by attempting a quick hand-to-hand transfer behind his vendor table, away from public view. Investigation notes revealed that his years of experience had made him overconfident about his ability to handle dangerous snakes without proper safety measures. The monocled cobra bit Vinny on the wrist as he attempted to grasp it behind the head. Investigators later noted that the depth of the paired punctures or faint scrape marks and the rapid onset of symptoms suggested a significant envenomation, possibly involving brief fang contact before the snake pulled away. Within the first hour, Vinny began experiencing early signs of neurotoxic effects, slurred speech and growing weakness, symptoms consistent with moderate to high-volume cobra envenomations, which he initially dismissed as fatigue from the long expo day. Investigators noted this was on the faster end of expected onset for monocled cobra envenomations, likely influenced by the snake's stress level and the close-range contact during the bite. Vendor statements indicated that he continued working for another hour, not wanting to lose the substantial sales he had lined up for the remainder of the expo. As the venom circulated, his symptoms steadily worsened over the next couple of hours, progressing to pronounced muscle weakness and loss of coordination. By approximately the third hour after the bite, Vinny collapsed at his vendor booth as his respiratory function began to deteriorate. The crowded aisles and limited access behind vendor tables slowed the arrival of paramedics, and the exact species involved was not confirmed until staff reached Vinny's booth, delaying the call for appropriate antivenom. The specialized antivenom required for monocled cobra bites was kept at a regional zoo rather than local hospitals, and response teams noted that transport time made immediate treatment impossible. Regional hospitals typically do not stock antivenom for non-native elapids, requiring reliance on zoo or research facility inventories. Vinny died before effective treatment could be administered, his body unable to withstand the progressive respiratory failure caused by the cobra's neurotoxic venom. The incident sent shockwaves through the reptile expo community and led to immediate revisions in handling protocols and booth inspection requirements for vendors working with venomous species. The investigation documented multiple past complaints about Vinny's handling practices, including missing restraint tools and incomplete transaction paperwork found at his booth. His death prompted expos in the region to adopt stricter vendor inspections and mandatory venomous species handling protocols. It was October 28, 2013, and the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Dallas sat silent under the Texas sun, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls telling the story of years of neglect and decay. The massive concrete structure had once housed a legitimate business, but recent investigations had revealed its use as a front for illegal exotic animal breeding operations that had been shut down months earlier by federal authorities. Tommy Chen had been hired by the property management company to clean out the warehouse in preparation for new tenants, a job that would provide much-needed extra income for his daughter's college fund. At 54, the hard-working maintenance worker had built a reputation for thorough, reliable service, but his experience was limited to conventional buildings, and he had no knowledge of the specialized dangers that might lurk in facilities used for exotic animal operations. The property management company had failed to inform Tommy about the building's previous use or the potential hazards that might remain from the illegal breeding operation. Their oversight would prove fatal, as the abandoned facility still contained evidence of its dangerous past in the form of escaped animals that had been surviving in the building's dark corners for months. Tommy approached the cleanup job with his characteristic thoroughness, systematically working through each section of the warehouse to remove debris and abandoned equipment. The building appeared to contain nothing more dangerous than broken glass and construction materials, reinforcing his assumption that the job would be routine and straightforward. Copperheads are among the most common venomous snakes in North America, possessing hemotoxic venom that causes tissue damage, swelling, and circulatory problems. These pit vipers typically reach lengths of 2 to 3 feet and are known for their defensive behavior when cornered or threatened. While their venom is generally less potent than other pit vipers, bites from large specimens can still cause serious medical complications, particularly when medical treatment is delayed. While moving equipment in a dark corner of the warehouse, Tommy accidentally stepped near the hiding place of a large copperhead that had escaped from a broken enclosure months earlier. The serpent had been surviving on small rodents that inhabited the abandoned building, and investigators noted that leaking pipes and shaded interior areas provided enough moisture and stable temperatures for long-term survival. The copperhead struck Tommy's ankle just above his work boot, its fangs penetrating his sock as it delivered a dose of hemotoxic venom. He reacted on instinct, pulling back and moving toward clearer light, before finally catching sight of the thick-bodied snake slipping into the shadows, its triangular head confirming it was venomous. He didn't have his phone on him. He had left it on the dashboard of his truck at the far end of the warehouse, assuming the cleanup job would be straightforward. He tried to make his way toward the exit, but the venom quickly triggered escalating swelling and pain at the bite site. Investigators noted a staggered trail of partial footprints and scuff marks leading from the bite location toward the exit, suggesting he had stopped multiple times as the swelling and pain increased. The hemotoxic venom caused progressive tissue damage and swelling that spread up Tommy's leg. Combined with his underlying health conditions, including unmanaged hypertension and early diabetes, and the prolonged delay in receiving medical treatment, the envenomation proved far more serious than typical copperhead bites. Tommy's condition deteriorated as he attempted to reach help. The combination of venom effects, stress, and his existing medical issues overwhelmed his system. He collapsed in the warehouse parking lot beside his truck, unable to complete his journey to the hospital. Investigators estimated he collapsed roughly 60 to 90 minutes after the bite, based on the position of his vehicle and the condition of the bite site. Tommy's family discovered his body the following day when he failed to return home from work. The investigation revealed the building's previous use as an illegal exotic animal breeding facility and the presence of escaped venomous snakes that posed ongoing dangers to anyone entering the structure. The incident exposed the broader problem of inadequate cleanup procedures following the shutdown of illegal animal operations and led to new protocols requiring specialized hazmat teams for buildings that had housed dangerous species. Tommy's death highlighted the hidden dangers that could persist long after illegal operations were officially closed. His family's lawsuit against the property management company resulted in improved disclosure requirements and safety protocols for maintenance workers assigned to buildings with unknown histories. The tragedy served as a reminder that the exotic animal trade's dangers extended far beyond the immediate participants to innocent workers and community members. It was March 15, 2015, when tragedy struck at Crocosaurus Cove, one of Darwin's premier wildlife attractions. The facility, home to over 30 massive saltwater crocodiles, sits in the heart of Australia's Northern Territory, where these apex predators have ruled the waterways for millions of years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the main display lagoon, a concrete habitat designed to house the park's most impressive specimens. The humid tropical air carried the distinctive scent of the wetlands, while tourists began gathering for the day's first feeding demonstration. Noah Whitfield, a 40-year-old maintenance supervisor, had worked at Crocosaurus Cove for 5 years. Known for his efficiency and shortcuts, the divorced father of 2 was eager to finish his weekly cleaning duties early to attend his son's afternoon baseball game. His colleague Miguel Santos had offered assistance that morning, but Noah dismissed the help, confident he could handle the routine walkway maintenance alone. Park Safety Inspector Janet Morrison had repeatedly flagged the deteriorating wooden railings for replacement, creating ongoing tension with Noah, who viewed her concerns as excessive caution. The elevated walkway system, positioned 12 feet above the crocodile habitat, required regular pressure washing to remove algae and debris that accumulated from the tropical climate. Noah's supervisor had recently praised his work ethic, unaware that his employees' rush to complete tasks was compromising safety protocols. Saltwater crocodiles are the world's largest living reptiles, with adult males typically reaching lengths of 14 to 17 feet and weighing between 880 to 1,100 pounds, though exceptional specimens can approach 18 feet. These prehistoric predators possess the strongest bite force of any animal on Earth, capable of exerting pressure exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch. Their hunting strategy relies on explosive ambush attacks, remaining motionless for hours before striking with lightning speed. In captive environments, feeding schedules create heightened states of anticipation and aggression among the population. The crocodiles at Crocosaurus Cove had been conditioned to associate human activity with feeding time, making them particularly responsive to disturbances. As Noah positioned his pressure washer near the compromised railing, the high-pressure water stream created vibrations that stressed the already weakened support posts. The wooden barrier suddenly splintered with a sharp crack, sending Noah tumbling backward through the air. He plummeted 12 feet into the murky water below, crashing directly into the center of the display pond with a tremendous splash. The impact momentarily stunned him, but he quickly surfaced, gasping and disoriented among 32 saltwater crocodiles that had been anticipating their morning feeding. The sound of his fall had alerted every predator in the enclosure, their primitive brains instantly recognizing the disturbance as a potential feeding opportunity. The crocodiles interpreted Noah's thrashing movements as prey behavior. Titan, the dominant 16-foot male, struck first with devastating force. His massive jaws clamped down on Noah's left leg, the bone-crushing bite shattering his femur and severing major arteries. The death roll began immediately, spinning Noah's body violently underwater as blood clouded the murky water. A second crocodile seized his right arm, its powerful jaws crushing bones and tearing through muscle tissue. A third predator grabbed his torso, puncturing his ribcage and collapsing his lung. The coordinated assault created a feeding frenzy as more crocodiles joined the attack, their prehistoric instincts driving them to compete for the unexpected meal. The feeding response escalated as more crocodiles converged on the scene. Noah's screams were cut short as he was repeatedly dragged beneath the surface, the coordinated assault dismembering his body through multiple death rolls. His spine snapped under the tremendous rotational forces, while massive blood loss from severed limbs caused rapid cardiovascular collapse. The churning water turned crimson as the prehistoric predators continued their relentless attack. Within 3 minutes, Noah had succumbed to massive trauma, blood loss, and drowning. Park security arrived to find only fragments of clothing and blood visible on the water's surface. The facility's security cameras had captured the entire incident in horrifying detail, documenting Noah's final moments as he was overwhelmed by the very predators he had worked around for years. An immediate investigation was launched by Northern Territory Workplace Safety Authorities, focusing on the facility's maintenance protocols and safety equipment failures. The park was temporarily closed to visitors, while investigators examined the scene. Noah's family expressed devastation at the loss, describing him as a dedicated father who had simply been trying to provide for his children. The incident prompted renewed scrutiny of wildlife facility safety standards across Australia, with calls for mandatory safety harnesses and improved barrier maintenance protocols. The tragedy served as a stark reminder of the inherent dangers faced by those working in close proximity to apex predators. While Noah Whitfield met his fate in the controlled environment of a wildlife park, other encounters with these apex predators occur in their natural domain. In the remote wilderness of Kakadu National Park, where ancient waterways harbor some of Australia's largest saltwater crocodiles, A different kind of tragedy would soon unfold, involving a man whose illegal activities would lead him into the territory of an 18-foot territorial male known as Magnus. Noah Whitfield's story showed how deadly crocodiles become when barriers fail. For Spencer Vaughn, it wasn't maintenance, but illegal profit that led him into Magnus's territory. It was August 7, 2016, when the remote wetlands of Kakadu National Park became the scene of a deadly encounter. Located in Australia's Northern Territory, this UNESCO World Heritage Site spans nearly 20,000 square kilometers of pristine wilderness, where ancient Aboriginal rock art overlooks waterways that have remained unchanged for millennia. The Adelaide River winds through this untouched landscape, its muddy banks concealing some of the world's largest saltwater crocodiles. During the dry season, these waterways become concentrated hunting grounds where protective females fiercely guard their nesting sites. Spencer Vaughn, a 34-year-old former zoo employee, had fallen from grace after losing his legitimate wildlife career due to misconduct allegations. Desperate for money and familiar with reptile behavior, he had turned to the lucrative black market trade in exotic animal products. Crocodile eggs commanded premium prices from private collectors and illegal breeding operations, making them an irresistible target for someone with Spencer's knowledge and financial desperation. His reluctant business partner, Tommy Nakamura, had warned against the Kakadu expedition, knowing the area's reputation for massive protective female crocodiles. Elder Mary Tungara, a local Aboriginal ranger, had recently noticed suspicious vehicle tracks near sacred nesting sites. Spencer's GPS coordinates led him to a known nesting area where female crocodiles had constructed their mud mounds weeks earlier. Saltwater crocodiles are apex predators that have survived virtually unchanged for over 200 million years. Adult females protecting their nests can exceed 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds, possessing the most powerful bite force in the animal kingdom at over 3,700 pounds per square inch. These ambush hunters are perfectly adapted for stealth, capable of remaining motionless for hours while monitoring their territory. During nesting season, female crocodiles become extremely aggressive, patrolling their nesting areas and attacking any perceived threats to their eggs. Their hunting strategy relies on explosive bursts of speed from concealed positions, using their massive tails for propulsion through water. Once they secure prey, the signature death roll disorients victims while drowning them in the murky depths. Spencer waded into the shallow water under the cover of darkness, his headlamp cutting through the humid night air as he approached the muddy nesting bank. The water reached his waist as he moved slowly through the Adelaide River, a waterproof bag slung across his shoulder for the valuable cargo. Unknown to the poacher, he had entered the territory of Magna, a 16-foot female saltwater crocodile that had been guarding her nest for weeks. The protective mother detected Spencer's presence immediately through water vibrations and foreign scent, submerging silently and approaching from downstream with practiced stealth. Spencer knelt in the shallow water, his hands working quickly to excavate buried eggs from the first nest he located. His headlamp illuminated the white, leathery shells as he carefully placed them in his waterproof bag, focused entirely on the valuable prize. Magna positioned herself just 10 feet away, her eyes and nostrils barely breaking the surface as she assessed the intruder. As Spencer reached for another clutch of eggs, the maternal guardian exploded from the water with tremendous force. Magna's massive jaws clamped down on Spencer's torso with bone-crushing power, the initial bite penetrating his ribcage and puncturing vital organs. The impact drove Spencer backward as his headlamp flew into the darkness, plunging the scene into complete blackness. The death roll began instantly, Magna spinning Spencer's body violently as she dragged him into deeper water. The rotational force snapped Spencer's spine in multiple places while the crocodile's grip crushed his sternum and collapsed both lungs. Blood filled Spencer's airways as broken ribs punctured his heart and liver. The powerful tail thrashed as Magna continued the death roll, breaking Spencer's pelvis and femur bones. Within 30 seconds, Spencer had succumbed to massive internal bleeding, drowning, and catastrophic spinal injuries. Magna then performed her instinctive behavior, wedging the body beneath a submerged log where it would decompose before consumption. Tommy Nakamura reported Spencer missing after he failed to return to their campsite by dawn. A search operation was launched by Northern Territory Police, but the remote location and crocodile-infested waters made recovery efforts extremely dangerous. Elder Mary Tungara's investigation revealed tire tracks and equipment fragments near the nesting site, confirming illegal poaching activity. The incident highlighted the ongoing problem of wildlife trafficking in protected areas, with authorities vowing increased patrols during nesting season. Spencer's estranged family expressed shock at his illegal activities, stating they had lost contact with him months earlier. Conservation groups used the tragedy to raise awareness about the devastating impact of wildlife trafficking on endangered species populations. The case remained officially unsolved, with Spencer's body never recovered from the ancient waterways he had tried to exploit. It was November 22, 2014, when the Tarcoles River in Costa Rica became the site of a tragic scientific expedition. Located on the Pacific coast near the Carrara National Park, this river system is renowned for having one of the highest concentrations of American crocodiles in Central America. The dry season had dramatically reduced water levels, transforming the normally expansive waterway into a series of concentrated pools that created ideal hunting territories for the region's apex predators. The surrounding tropical dry forest echoed with the calls of scarlet macaws and howler monkeys, while the muddy riverbanks revealed countless crocodile tracks from the previous night's hunting activities. Miranda Keegan, a 29-year-old marine biologist from the University of Costa Rica, had dedicated her doctoral research to understanding American crocodile behavior patterns during drought conditions. Known for her fearless approach to fieldwork, she had been documenting territorial responses and feeding behaviors for 6 months. Her mentor, Dr. Carlos Mendoza, had repeatedly warned her about working alone near the water during peak territorial periods, but Miranda's passion for her research often overrode safety protocols. Paulo Silva, her experienced local guide, understood the dangers of the Tarcoles River, but had grown accustomed to Miranda's determined independence. The research station had received funding to study how climate change and seasonal droughts affected crocodile populations, making this dry season particularly valuable for data collection. American crocodiles are formidable predators, with typical large males reaching lengths of 11 to 15 feet and weighing over 1,000 pounds. Unlike their more aggressive alligator cousins, these crocodiles are typically more reclusive, but territorial males become extremely dangerous when defending prime hunting grounds. Their powerful jaws can exert bite forces exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch, while their muscular tails serve as both propulsion systems and devastating weapons. During drought conditions, concentrated prey populations create highly valuable territories that males will defend aggressively against any perceived threats. The death roll, their signature killing technique, involves spinning their prey underwater to disorient and drown victims, while breaking bones through tremendous rotational force. Miranda approached the research site at dawn, her sampling equipment organized methodically as she prepared for another day of behavioral observations. The river section had shrunk to roughly half its normal width, creating concentrated fish and bird populations that attracted the area's dominant predator. El Jefe, a massive 14-foot American crocodile, had claimed this territory and patrolled it aggressively for weeks. Paulo was 50 meters away, setting up camera equipment, when Miranda began her approach to the water's edge, extending her sampling pole toward the remaining deep water. As Miranda leaned forward to collect her water sample, the saturated mud beneath her knees suddenly gave way. She slid down the steep bank, her equipment scattering as she splashed into the shallow water just 15 feet from the concealed predator. El Jefe had been monitoring the area from a submerged position, his body perfectly camouflaged among floating debris and vegetation. The sudden intrusion triggered an immediate territorial response from the massive crocodile. El Jefe lunged forward with explosive speed, his powerful jaws clamping down on Miranda's left thigh with bone-crushing force. The initial bite severed her femoral artery and shattered her femur bone, sending blood streaming into the muddy water. Her scream alerted Paulo, who immediately began running toward the riverbank. The crocodile's death roll began instantly, spinning Miranda's body violently as she fought desperately to reach the shore. The rotational force broke her pelvis and dislocated her hip joint, while the crocodile's grip tore through muscle and tissue. The churning water turned crimson as El Jefe maintained his hold, performing another death roll that snapped Miranda's lower spine and caused massive internal bleeding. Her struggles weakened rapidly as blood loss and shock took their toll. The attack lasted only 40 seconds, but the crocodile's powerful bite and death roll had inflicted fatal injuries. Paulo reached the shore and threw rocks at El Jefe, but the territorial predator maintained his grip until Miranda stopped moving, her body held firmly in his jaws as she drowned in the bloodied water. Costa Rican authorities launched an immediate investigation into the research station's safety protocols, questioning why Miranda had been allowed to work so close to known crocodile habitat without proper safety equipment. The University of Costa Rica suspended all fieldwork pending a comprehensive review of research procedures. Environmental groups used the tragedy to highlight the increasing dangers faced by scientists studying wildlife in their natural habitats as climate change intensifies territorial behaviors. Miranda's family described her as a passionate conservationist who had dedicated her life to protecting the species that ultimately claimed her. The incident prompted new safety requirements for researchers working near crocodile habitats throughout Central America. It was September 14, 2013, when the aftermath of Hurricane Idalia transformed the Florida Everglades into a deadly maze of displaced wildlife. 3 days after the Category 3 storm devastated South Florida, the vast wetlands remained submerged under unprecedented floodwaters that had pushed saltwater deep into freshwater territories. The hurricane's storm surge had created an alien landscape where familiar hiking trails disappeared beneath murky channels and submerged trees created a labyrinth of hidden dangers. Caleb Drummond, a 38-year-old veteran park ranger with 15 years of Everglades experience, had been promoted to lead the post-storm assessment team just months before Idalia struck. Known for his calm demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge of local wildlife, Caleb possessed an intimate understanding of the park's normal ecosystem patterns. His partner, Sarah Chen, a 31-year-old junior ranger, had suggested waiting another day before entering the most severely flooded areas. Captain Rita Gonzalez had authorized the early assessment mission despite ongoing flood warnings, trusting Caleb's reputation for cautious decision-making. The National Park Service needed immediate damage reports to coordinate rescue operations and assess threats to both wildlife and potential visitors. American crocodiles are the apex predators of South Florida's coastal waters, with adults reaching lengths of up to 15 feet and weighing over 1,000 pounds. Unlike alligators, these crocodiles prefer saltwater environments and typically maintain established territories along coastal mangroves and tidal creeks. Hurricane storm surges can violently displace these territorial predators, forcing them into unfamiliar freshwater areas where they become stressed and unpredictable. Their powerful bite force exceeds 2,500 pounds per square inch, while their muscular tails can deliver devastating blows capable of breaking human bones. When displaced from their normal territories, American crocodiles become highly aggressive as they seek to establish new hunting grounds, often attacking without the typical warning behaviors observed in their natural habitat. Caleb waded through the transformed landscape, his ranger uniform soaked to the chest as he documented storm damage using waterproof equipment. The floodwaters had created a featureless environment where GPS units became essential for navigation. Sarah followed 20 yards behind, both rangers moving carefully through water that concealed submerged obstacles and debris. Among the displaced wildlife was Athena, a 10-foot female American crocodile who had been forced from her coastal den and was now desperately seeking new territory in the flooded hammocks. She had not eaten in 4 days and was defending what she perceived as her temporary domain. Caleb approached what had been a hiking trail before the storm, now a channel of brown water flowing between submerged trees. He paused to photograph a damaged observation platform, positioning himself for the best camera angle. Athena lay motionless just 15 feet away, her body perfectly camouflaged among floating debris and fallen branches. The stressed crocodile had been monitoring the area for hours, her predatory instincts heightened by territorial displacement and hunger. As Caleb stepped forward to capture another image, his movement created ripples that reached the concealed predator. Athena exploded from her hidden position with lightning speed, her massive jaws closing around Caleb's torso before he could react. The impact drove him backward into deeper water as Sarah screamed from behind. The crocodile's powerful bite crushed several ribs and punctured his right lung, while her razor-sharp teeth penetrated deep into his chest cavity. The death roll began immediately, Athena spinning Caleb's body violently as she sought to disorient and drown her prey. The rotational force snapped his spine in 2 places, while the continued pressure from her jaws collapsed his sternum. Blood filled his punctured lung as broken ribs lacerated his heart and liver. His ranger radio crackled with Sarah's panicked calls for help, but the nearest rescue team was miles away through the flooded wilderness. The attack lasted 45 seconds, during which Athena's death roll broke Caleb's pelvis and caused massive internal bleeding. The veteran ranger drowned in the floodwaters he had come to assess, his body held firmly in the jaws of the displaced predator. The National Park Service launched an immediate investigation into the decision to enter flood zones before wildlife displacement patterns could be properly assessed. Captain Rita Gonzalez faced scrutiny for authorizing the mission despite ongoing safety warnings from meteorologists and wildlife biologists. The incident prompted new protocols requiring aerial surveys before ground teams could enter hurricane-affected areas. Caleb's family described him as a dedicated conservationist who had spent his career protecting the Everglades ecosystem. His death highlighted the unpredictable dangers faced by first responders in natural disaster zones where displaced wildlife creates hidden threats. The tragedy led to enhanced safety training for park rangers working in post-hurricane environments. It was June 3, 2015, when the pristine waters of the Daintree River in Queensland, Australia, became the backdrop for a deadly social media stunt. The ancient waterway flows through one of the world's oldest rainforests, where 130-million-year-old vegetation creates a cathedral of green that stretches to the water's edge. This UNESCO World Heritage Site harbors some of Australia's most dangerous wildlife, including the highest concentration of saltwater crocodiles on the continent. Warning signs in multiple languages line the riverbanks, alerting visitors to the extreme danger posed by these apex predators. Haley Monroe, a 26-year-old travel influencer with 2,000 followers, had built her brand on taking risks for dramatic content that surpassed her competitors' safer travel posts. Known for ignoring safety warnings in pursuit of the perfect shot, she had dismissed repeated warnings from local guides about the Daintree's crocodile population. Her boyfriend, Jake Morrison, a 24-year-old camera operator with limited wildlife experience, was more focused on capturing engaging footage than ensuring their safety. Bill Kowalski, an experienced local tour guide, had refused their request for access to restricted areas, forcing them to venture out independently. The couple had researched the most dangerous locations along the river, specifically seeking areas with prominent warning signs that would add authenticity to their extreme adventure content. Saltwater crocodiles are the world's largest living reptiles and most successful apex predators, with adult males reaching lengths of over 20 feet and weighing more than a ton. These ancient hunters possess the strongest bite force of any animal on Earth, capable of exerting pressure exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch. Their hunting strategy relies on perfect camouflage and explosive ambush attacks, remaining motionless for hours while monitoring their territory from submerged positions. The Daintree River system supports some of the largest saltwater crocodiles in Australia, with territorial males claiming stretches of river that they defend aggressively against any intrusion. Haley positioned herself on the wet rocks at the water's edge, her bright pink outfit creating a stark contrast against the dark water as Jake adjusted camera angles from the bank. The area was marked with multiple warning signs that she deliberately included in her shots, speaking animatedly about the untamed beauty of the Australian wilderness. Bill Kowalski watched helplessly from his tour boat. The stretch of river was known territory for Goliath, a 17-foot saltwater crocodile that had claimed this section for over 2 decades. The massive predator lay submerged near the opposite bank, only his eyes and nostrils visible above the surface as he monitored the unusual activity. As Haley gestured dramatically toward the river while delivering her scripted commentary, her designer sandals lost grip on the algae-covered rocks. She fell backward into the shallow water with a loud splash, landing just 10 feet from Goliath's concealed position. The sudden disturbance triggered an immediate predatory response from the territorial crocodile. Goliath exploded from the water with devastating speed, his massive jaws clamping down on Haley's torso with bone-crushing force. The initial bite crushed her ribcage and punctured both lungs, while his razor-sharp teeth penetrated deep into her chest cavity. Jake continued filming in shock as the attack unfolded before his camera. The death roll began instantly, Goliath spinning Haley's body violently as he dragged her into deeper water. The rotational force snapped her spine in multiple places, while the continued pressure from his jaws collapsed her sternum and shattered her shoulder blades. Blood streamed from massive lacerations as broken ribs punctured her heart and liver. The churning water turned crimson as Goliath maintained his grip, performing another death roll that broke her pelvis and femur bones. Haley's struggles ceased within 30 seconds, as massive blood loss and drowning combined to end her life. The ancient predator held her motionless body in his powerful jaws, asserting dominance over his territory. Queensland authorities launched an investigation into how the influencers had accessed the restricted area, reviewing security measures at dangerous wildlife locations. The incident sparked debate about social media platforms' responsibility for content that encourages dangerous behavior in pursuit of viral fame. Tourism officials expressed concern about copycat incidents, as Haley's final video gained millions of views posthumously. Haley's family criticized social media culture for pressuring content creators to take increasingly dangerous risks for engagement. The tragedy prompted calls for stricter enforcement of wildlife protection zones and enhanced penalties for unauthorized access to dangerous areas. Haley Monroe's story showed how social media fame can lead to deadly encounters with apex predators. It was August 12, 2015, in a quiet neighborhood in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The late afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the well-kept lawns. From the street, nothing seemed unusual, and the houses looked calm. But inside one of the homes at the end of the street, an accident was quietly taking shape. Roger Halston was 45 years old and lived alone in his two-story house. He had been obsessed with snakes since his 20s, and over the years had built a collection of more than 50 snakes. His collection included large Burmese pythons, king cobras, and several species of vipers. He had changed his home to fit them, filling the basement with glass tanks, heat lamps, and other equipment. The air was thick with the musky smell of snake waste, which he considered a minor problem. Roger spent his time reading about snakes, keeping feeding logs and watching behavior, rarely leaving the basement for anything else. A week earlier, Roger had bought a rare white king cobra from a private seller. Known for being unpredictable, the snake was considered both a challenge and a prized addition among collectors. Earlier that week, a python had bitten him while he was fixing its tank, but he dismissed it as minor. That evening, he planned to feed several snakes at once, confident he could manage the risks. Friends and fellow hobbyists had warned him repeatedly against handling multiple venomous snakes at the same time, warning that even a small mistake could be fatal. But he ignored them. The basement was dimly lit, with heat lamps buzzing above each tank. Feeding containers and empty boxes were scattered across the floor, along with snake-handling tools and partially prepared frozen rodents. The aisles between tanks were narrow, leaving little room to move. The snakes themselves ranged from 10-foot Burmese pythons to adult king cobras, each capable of deadly defensive behavior if startled. Pythons squeeze with enormous strength, and venomous snakes like king cobras and vipers can strike quickly, affecting the nervous system or delivering tissue-damaging venom. Neighbors had noticed unusual activity in Roger's home. Some had seen large boxes of snakes arriving and were sometimes overwhelmed by the smell coming from his basement. A few had casually warned him about stacking tanks too high and overfilling his space. Local rules required secure handling and containment for venomous snakes. But Roger, overconfident in his experience, ignored the warning signs. He overlooked hissed warnings, defensive coiling, and repeated strikes at his gloved hands during routine feeding. At about 7:45 p.m., Roger began the feeding process. He carried several dead rodents into the basement, moving from tank to tank. The vipers were the first to react defensively. One viper jerked backward sharply when Roger's hand approached, narrowly missing a bite. Distracted, he stepped awkwardly, his foot catching the edge of a nearby python tank. The small python tipped over, falling with a crash that echoed across the cramped basement. The noise startled several snakes in the immediate area. One python lunged defensively at Roger's legs, followed moments later by another reacting to nearby movement. The white king cobra, sensing sudden disturbance, struck defensively at exposed arms and legs. Each snake acted independently, responding to vibrations, sudden motions, and unfamiliar sounds in its immediate environment. Other snakes coiled defensively or retreated to corners of the basement, avoiding direct involvement. A neighbor, Sarah Peterson, later reported hearing loud hisses, thuds, and breaking glass faintly audible through a partially open basement window. Alarmed, she called 911. Roger's struggle lasted only a few minutes. By the time help arrived, he was found unresponsive, partially coiled by one large python. Bite marks were evident from the king cobra, which had begun causing severe neurotoxic effects, and from several vipers. The floor was scattered with broken glass, bedding, and overturned feeding containers. 3 of the snakes were captured in temporary boxes, while the remainder hid in basement corners or dense vegetation near the house, out of sight. Security cameras from neighbors captured some movement and disturbances, confirming that the sequence of events, including slipping, tipping a tank, and startling the snakes, directly led to the fatal incident, though the strikes themselves were not visible. Investigators concluded that the bites and constriction were defensive responses, not a coordinated attack. Paramedics attempted to stabilize him while animal control worked to secure the remaining snakes. Despite their efforts to administer antivenom and provide emergency care, the combined effects of multiple venomous bites and progressive python constriction had already caused severe damage. The king cobra's venom affected his nervous system. The viper bites caused tissue damage, and the python's gradual constriction further complicated his breathing and blood circulation. In the weeks following the incident, the city reviewed private ownership regulations for venomous reptiles, imposing stricter containment and liability rules. Prospective snake owners were now required to obtain special permits, maintain secure enclosures, and carry liability insurance. The incident also prompted discussions about the ethics and safety of keeping large collections of venomous snakes in residential areas. Wildlife experts emphasized that these animals, while fascinating, require specialized knowledge, proper facilities, and respect for their dangerous nature. It was May 3rd, 2016, in a remote village by the river in Pará, Brazil. The morning was foggy from the village. The river looked calm and slow, but the shadows along the water hinted at hidden dangers below the surface. André Silva was 32 years old and had spent years studying snakes. He was an amateur snake expert who worked with a small local zoo. He documented snake movements and sometimes caught specimens for research. He lived with his wife and young child, who he talked about often. He saw his work as a way to balance his interest in snakes with providing for his family. André was confident in his field skills and experienced with large snakes, but his confidence sometimes made him take unnecessary risks. He often went into thick jungle areas alone, believing his knowledge and strength could handle environmental dangers. That day, he planned to trap and measure a female anaconda that locals had warned was unusually aggressive. André had been tracking the river and its tributaries for weeks. He mapped snake locations, noted water depths, and recorded movements. He carried measuring tools, a small net, and a bag with snake handling equipment. He wore waterproof boots and lightweight clothing, but the forest floor was slippery and tree roots stuck out unpredictably. Despite these precautions, the thick vegetation and shallow streams created hidden dangers. The riverbank was soft and muddy, and the water often hid sudden drop-offs. The target of André's expedition was a female green anaconda that could reach over 20 feet long and weigh several hundred pounds. These snakes kill by squeezing, applying huge pressure until prey suffocates. While they are usually ambush predators, anacondas react quickly to threats, striking defensively if disturbed. Their muscular bodies allow them to coil and pull even large animals into water, where escape becomes difficult. Warnings had been frequent. Villagers mentioned unusual behavior from the anaconda, including getting upset when boats came near and sightings of her coiled near fishing paths. They told André not to enter the water alone or try to corner the snake, but he ignored these observations, trusting his handling techniques and experience with smaller snakes. He stepped into a tributary around 4 p.m., believing it to be shallow, unaware of a sudden drop-off hidden by murky water and water plants. As André waded in, his foot sank deeper than expected, causing him to lose his balance. He bent forward to steady himself, accidentally disturbing the anaconda, which had been coiled along the bank. Villagers on a nearby ridge saw him stumble and noticed the massive green body of the snake rising in a defensive posture. Andre tried to step back, but the anaconda's coils gradually wrapped around his legs and lower body, pulling him slowly toward deeper water. His bag and tools scattered into the shallows, creating noise and further agitation. The struggle lasted several minutes. The initial coil around Andre's legs restricted his movement, and each of his attempts to free himself caused the snake to adjust its position, gradually tightening its grip. His arms moved through mud and reeds, stirring the water, while the anaconda shifted defensively rather than aggressively hunting. Water rose to his waist and then chest as the snake's strength slowly pulled him farther into the tributary. From the ridge, villagers could see floating items, his hat, and scattered tools, but the details of the snake's hold were mostly obscured by reeds and murky water. Despite splashing and struggling, Andre could not free himself, and the surrounding brush prevented direct assistance. By the time local rescuers reached the tributary, the snake had released him and withdrawn into the riverbank vegetation, likely due to lack of movement or perceived threat. Only the coils remained briefly visible in the shallow water. Andre's body was never recovered. The river and its deep channels had hidden all trace. His measuring tools, net and bag, were found partially floating downstream, muddy and waterlogged. Villagers conducted a ceremonial ritual along the river, leaving offerings to honor his memory and the forces of the river, a customary practice for those lost to natural hazards. Later, the same anaconda was spotted but never captured, moving silently through the tributary system. The incident showed the dangers of underestimating the environment and overestimating personal skill. Investigators noted that the drop-off Andre had misjudged, combined with the snake's defensive response, created a realistic and fatal situation. It was September 21st, 2014, in rural Queensland, Australia. The evening was humid and it had rained earlier. Storm clouds were overhead. From the farmhouse, the property looked calm, but on one edge of the land, something dangerous was about to happen. Luke McAdams was 29 years old and had worked as a farmhand on his family's property for most of his life. He lived with his partner and was responsible for taking care of the fields, livestock, and buildings. Beyond farm work, he was interested in snakes, especially pythons, which he kept in a small area near the edge of the property. Recently, he had gotten a 12-foot carpet python, which was unusually large even for that type of snake. Luke had spent weeks getting it used to its new home, feeding it and watching its behavior. He thought he could handle it safely. Though he had some experience, he sometimes took unnecessary risks, including checking on the snakes at night when it was hard to see. That night, Luke wanted to check on his snakes before the rain came back. He had already noticed minor scratches on his arms from handling the python earlier in the week, but he thought they were no big deal. His partner had told him to secure the enclosures properly and suggested waiting until daylight. But Luke ignored the advice. He wanted to make sure the snakes were fed and accounted for. He underestimated how stormy conditions could make the ground slippery and make it harder to access the outdoor pens. The enclosure area was an open space with a dirt floor that was muddy from earlier rain. The fence was low and reinforced with wire mesh. Each tank and pen had branches, rocks, and hiding spots for the snakes, but space was cramped and crowded. Light rain was falling, making surfaces slippery under the dim outdoor lights. The 12-foot carpet python's pen had a metal latch that was slightly bent from previous use. Its grip was weakened just enough that a moment of not paying attention could allow the snake to escape. Carpet pythons are non-venomous constrictors that can subdue prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around it. A large python of this size can immobilize an adult human over several minutes, gradually increasing pressure with each coil. Usually they avoid confrontation, biting only defensively, and constriction becomes effective slowly rather than instantly. Wrong moves, loud movements, or startled reactions can cause defensive strikes from even well-adjusted snakes. Earlier that evening, neighbors had seen Luke moving between pens in the dark. They saw him lean over the large python's enclosure and occasionally inspect the latches. Stormy weather made the ground slippery, limiting safe footing. The latch on the python's enclosure was slightly bent and loose, enough that a startled snake could push it open, though Luke did not notice the problem. At around 9 p.m., Luke bent down to check the python's water dish. His foot slipped in the mud, causing him to stumble forward. The slight movement was enough to startle the python. It slipped past the weakened latch and rose from the pen with a low hiss, initially coiling around his lower legs. Luke tried to step back, but the wet ground made him slip, and the snake tightened gradually as he struggled. The neighbors, watching from their farmhouse a few hundred feet away, could make out Luke's shape moving strangely and heard muffled calls, but the low light and distance prevented them from seeing any details of the struggle. The python gradually moved higher as Luke struggled, restricting his arm movements and compressing his chest over several minutes. Mud splashed, branches rustled, and his flashlight fell to the ground. The snake's actions were deliberate and defensive, responding to sudden motion and noise, not hunting. Slowly, Luke found it harder to breathe and move, the constrictor's strength increasing with each coil. By the time his partner reached the enclosure with a flashlight and shouted for help, Luke was completely unable to move. Attempts to manually pull the python off without proper tools were dangerous and often caused the snake to tighten its grip further. The snake remained coiled defensively around him. Emergency animal authorities were called, and when they arrived, they killed the python to safely recover his body. The scene showed the python's coils had wrapped progressively, with the ground churned in mud and water. Minor scratches on his arms and legs matched prior handling incidents, and disturbed plants showed the struggle had been real and went on for a while. The aftermath led to the temporary closure of the property's snake collection. Inspectors documented all enclosures, latches, and pens. Recommendations were made for secure containment, nighttime handling precautions, and additional training for anyone working with large constrictors. It was June 7, 2017, in the bustling Chalai market in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. The morning air hung thick with moisture from the previous night's monsoon rains. By midday, something would happen in one corner of this crowded marketplace that would change how venomous snakes were sold in Kerala forever. Ravi Menon was 40 years old. A lean man with calloused hands and deep-set eyes had been selling exotic reptiles for nearly 15 years, operating from a small wooden stall squeezed between a spice merchant and a woman who sold jasmine garlands. Ravi lived alone in a cramped room above his shop, his only companions the dozen snakes he kept in wooden boxes and glass terrariums. The locals knew Ravi as a man who took dangerous risks. While other snake handlers used long metal hooks and thick leather gloves, Ravi preferred to work with his bare hands. He believed that direct contact allowed him to better read the animal's moods and movements. Customers would gather in small crowds to watch him lift cobras and vipers from their containers, mesmerized by his apparent fearlessness. Ravi had been waiting for this particular morning for 2 weeks. A wealthy collector from Kochi was coming to see his newest acquisition, a monocled cobra he had purchased from a dealer in Tamil Nadu. The snake was magnificent, nearly 4 feet long with distinctive eye spots on the back of its hood. It was also increasingly aggressive, coiling tightly whenever anyone approached its container and spreading its hood at the slightest disturbance. The marketplace that morning buzzed with its usual energy. The stone floor was slick with water and crushed vegetables, making footing treacherous in some areas. Monocled cobras are among India's most dangerous snakes. Unlike their larger king cobra cousins, they are smaller but far more aggressive when cornered. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and respiratory failure within hours if left untreated. In the wild, they prefer to retreat when threatened, but in captivity, with nowhere to escape, they become unpredictable and defensive. Experienced handlers knew to give these snakes plenty of space and always use proper tools. But Ravi had grown overconfident through the years, without a serious accident. Just 3 days earlier, a young boy had wandered too close to the cobra's container, and the snake had struck at the glass so violently that several customers had jumped back in alarm. Ravi had laughed it off, telling the boy's worried mother that the snake was just showing off. He had dismissed the incident as normal behavior, refusing to acknowledge what other handlers would have recognized as clear warning signs. The day went on, and Ravi arranged his stall carefully, positioning the cobra's wooden box on the counter where the collector would have the best view. Inside the container, the snake remained coiled in the back corner. Around 10:15 a.m., Ravi spotted his customer making his way through the crowd. Ravi began preparing for his demonstration. He had done this hundreds of times before. Lift the snake, show its hood, demonstrate its alertness to prove its quality. When Ravi opened the cobra's container, the snake was already pressed against the front wall with its hood spread. Its tongue moved quickly, and its body was tight. Instead of staying in the back corner like usual, it was ready to attack. The cobra bit Ravi as soon as he put his hand inside. The snake moved very fast and bit his wrist above his watch. The pain went up his arm right away. Ravi tried to pull back, but the cobra held on and wrapped around his arm. People screamed and ran away, knocking over fruit and breaking bottles on the ground. The collector just stood there, shocked. For several seconds, that felt much longer. Ravi fought with the snake around his arm. The cobra's hood was wide open, showing the marks that give these snakes their name. Every time Ravi moved, the fangs went deeper and more poison went into his body. Finally, Ravi hit his arm hard against the wooden table. This made the cobra let go and fall back into its box. The snake curled up right away. Ravi stepped back, holding his bleeding arm. You could see 4 holes where the fangs had bitten him. The market became very busy and loud. The spice seller next door tore a piece from a cloth bag and tied it around Ravi's arm. Someone ran toward the main road to get help, yelling for drivers to move out of the way. The collector was scared, but stayed calm now. He got down next to Ravi and pressed hard on the cloth as blood came through it. Ravi stayed sitting up, but his body was shaking. The feeling of no sensation moved past his hand, and his words were hard to understand when he tried to talk. The morning traffic was very heavy, so it was a small 3-wheel taxi and not an ambulance that took Ravi away. The driver used his horn the whole time as people and motorcycles moved out of the way. At one point, Ravi's head fell to the side and the collector shook him hard to keep him awake. Doctors met them at the hospital door and took him quickly into the emergency room. They gave him medicine to fight the snake poison right away, but by then, Ravi's arm had grown very big with swelling. His skin had turned dark with marks that went past his elbow. The treatment saved his life, but left his hand weak forever. 3 of his fingers never got full feeling back, and his grip strength never came back. The bite changed more than Ravi's body. It changed the market. Local government workers said that all dangerous snakes must be kept behind locked walls, and they started checking the stalls without warning. Ravi's cobra was taken away and sent to a government snake research center. Months later, Ravi closed his stall for good. The small space was taken over by a vegetable seller, but people who shop there still pointed out to new people. That's where the snake man was bitten, they say. It is a quiet warning that even the most skilled handler can run out of luck. It was October 18th, 2018, near a research station outside Manaus, Brazil. Steady rain had left the forest floor wet and slippery, with mist clinging to the trees and rainfall masking distant sounds. Though the station looked calm, the flooded terrain was hazardous for anyone moving through it. Clara Fernandez was 27 years old and a herpetology student doing field research on venomous snakes. She shared a small cabin with 3 fellow students and spent most of her days cataloging species, measuring specimens, and recording behavior for her thesis. Clara was careful and detailed in her work, but she was known among her peers for taking calculated risks. She would work alone and sometimes remove gloves to get better touch observations. That morning, she planned to study a bushmaster near a flooded section of the forest, intending to record detailed behavior and habitat notes. She carefully packed her equipment: a handheld camera, field notebook, measuring tools, and her personal protective gear, leaving gloves aside for closer observations. By mid-morning, Clara had moved along narrow trails through dense vegetation. The forest floor was waterlogged, with mud pooling in low spots and small streams running unpredictably beneath her feet. Fallen leaves and submerged roots made footing uncertain. Birds were quiet, and insects were less active under the persistent rain. Clara noticed broken branches, disturbed leaves, and shallow depressions in the mud. These were signs that animals had recently moved through the area. She knew these were indications of nearby snakes, but felt confident in her knowledge and experience. Her peers had repeatedly warned her against entering flooded zones alone, particularly in areas known for bushmasters, but she believed she could manage a brief observation. The bushmaster is one of South America's largest vipers and can reach 10 feet long. Its venom is highly dangerous, capable of rapid bleeding throughout the body, tissue death, and low blood pressure. These snakes are ambush predators that generally avoid humans but will strike repeatedly if threatened. They are heavy-bodied and able to deliver precise, multiple strikes. They can adjust their position defensively when an intruder continues to bother them. Around 3:15 p.m., Clara reached a particularly flooded patch near a tributary. The water was murky, hiding roots and small drop-offs, and the mud was thick underfoot. She knelt at the edge of the water to examine tracks and take measurements. As she shifted her weight to steady herself, her foot slipped on a submerged root, causing her to stumble. In doing so, she accidentally disturbed a bushmaster hidden beneath leaf litter and shallow water. The snake reacted immediately, striking defensively. The first bite landed on her lower leg, puncturing the skin and causing sharp pain. Clara tried to step back, but the slippery, uneven terrain made it difficult to regain balance. Each movement sent vibrations through the water and mud, which the bushmaster perceived as continued threats. The snake struck again, biting her lower leg and calf in quick succession before recoiling into the leaf litter. While bushmasters do not squeeze like pythons, Clara's struggle in the mud and water slowed her movements and made retreat difficult. Her arms and hands disturbed floating debris and leaves, adding further stimuli, and her handheld camera and notebook fell into the water, partially submerged and catching glimpses of the tense scene. From a nearby tree platform, her fellow students could see splashes and floating items, but vegetation partially blocked their view of the snake. The encounter lasted only moments, but each bite injected venom, causing immediate local swelling and sharp pain. Clara focused on regaining her footing, the mud and water presenting almost as much danger as the snake itself. Clara was aware of the potential body-wide effects, including tissue death, low blood pressure, and blood clotting problems, but she had to first focus on moving through the flooded terrain while keeping herself upright. Field antivenom kits were brought to the scene within 20 minutes. Clara received initial treatment from her peers while being prepared for evacuation. She was then airlifted to a hospital in Manaus, where doctors monitored her for body-wide poisoning. The Bushmaster's venom had caused local tissue damage, swelling, and early signs of clotting disruption. Emergency care included giving antivenom, pain management, and close monitoring of blood pressure. Over the following days, she underwent surgeries to remove dead tissue and prevent infection. Recovery required several months of physical therapy to restore movement and strength in her affected leg. The incident prompted a reassessment of fieldwork rules at the research station. Solo work in flooded areas was banned, and mandatory protective equipment, including gloves and stable footwear, was required. Equipment handling and communication rules were revised to ensure students remained in visual or radio contact at all times. Clara's partially recovered camera footage and field notes were preserved for research and safety training purposes. The incident showed how quickly a combination of environmental dangers, defensive animal behavior, and human error can escalate into a dangerous situation. Her movements, although instinctive, provoked a realistic defensive response from the Bushmaster, highlighting the delicate balance between observation and safety in field research. By the end of the season, the research station had implemented stricter guidelines and incorporated the incident into safety briefings. Clara's experience became an example for new students of the importance of staying cautious, using protective equipment, and respecting both the environment and the animals being studied. Her careful documentation and survival reinforced the value of preparedness, emergency response, and measured risk-taking in the field. It was August 4th, 2016, in South Jakarta, Indonesia. The night was heavy with damp air, the alleys behind the mid-rise office block nearly silent except for the faint buzz of insects near a dim security lamp. At that hour, in the shadow of stacked crates near the loading bay, something stirred that would turn a routine shift into a fatal encounter. Raffi Hadiman was 41, a quiet janitor who had worked nights in the building for nearly a decade. Known for his steady habits and reliability, he rarely spoke beyond polite greetings and spent most evenings moving methodically between floors with mop, broom, and bucket. His life was simple. He lived in a rented room not far from the complex, ate at the same street stall before each shift, and was respected among co-workers for his diligence. Raffi often accepted the solitude of night work, preferring the calm after tenants left, when the building belonged only to him and the guards. He took pride in his role, though it was unnoticed by most. His goal was steady income, not advancement, and he approached every task with quiet persistence. For him, working through the night in dim corridors felt ordinary, even when others remarked on strange noises or shadows by the garbage area. The loading dock sat at the back of the building, hemmed in by tall concrete walls and littered with plastic crates, trash bins, and scraps of food waste. Rats had become a regular nuisance, darting across the floor and squeezing through drainage gaps. Guards joked about something big hunting the rats, and just days earlier, grainy CCTV footage had captured a large, dark shape sliding near the garbage bins. Some workers speculated it was a python, a suspicion well-founded. Reticulated pythons thrive in such environments. Native to Southeast Asia, they are the world's longest snakes, often exceeding 20 feet. Though they prefer forests and wetlands, urban sprawl provides cover and prey in the form of rodents. A python this size is an ambush predator, lying in wait near consistent food sources. Its attack involves a rapid strike with recurved teeth, followed by immediate constriction, tightening coils with every exhale of the prey. Death typically comes by suffocation rather than broken bones. That night at the dock, when Raffi carried his mop bucket outside to dump dirty water, he paused briefly at the doorway, glancing towards the stacked crates. The security light flickered, and for a moment the shadows seemed seemed deeper than usual. But treating everything as normal, he then stepped towards it. His routine felt safe, familiar, until it wasn't. At 2:15 a.m., CCTV cameras recorded the moment of attack. The bucket clattered onto the concrete as the python erupted from behind the crates, its body lunging forward with surprising speed. In the footage, Raffi staggered, arms splaying outward as coils locked around his torso. The python wound itself tighter, dragging him sideways to the ground. His kicks struck the floor hard, shoes scraping against the rough concrete. The constriction intensified within minutes. Raffi arched upward, his chest compressed under the snake's coils. His hands clawed weakly at the thick body binding him, but the python folded over his shoulders and neck. The camera captured his legs thrashing in wide arcs, shoes smearing streaks of dirty water across the ground. His struggles grew jerky, interrupted by gasps. The sound of his muffled cries carried faintly into the corridor, but the building remained silent inside. As the few minutes passed, his movements slowed. The footage showed his arms stiffening before dropping heavily against the floor. His legs continued with sporadic spasms, the final reflexes of a body starved of air. The python, steady and unrelenting, adjusted its grip, the thick muscles shifting visibly under the loading bay's dim light. The cameras caught the beginning of ingestion as the snake anchored its jaws onto his scalp before dragging him behind the stacked crates, out of clear view. At dawn, when Raffi's absence was noticed, a supervisor checked the janitor's closet and found his cart untouched. Reviewing the overnight footage revealed the attack in full. Police sealed the area by mid-morning, locating the python still nearby, its massive body bulging unmistakably with human remains. Authorities euthanized the snake before cutting it open to recover him. The office closed for 2 days. On the loading dock where he had died, co-workers gathered for a prayer vigil, standing quietly as incense burned and offerings were set on the ground. The building management reinforced trash storage and rodent control, while city officials reminded property owners that food waste and vermin attract predators into urban spaces. It was May 13, 2017, in a rural village in Uttar Pradesh, India. The day had been long and hot. By dusk, the village was quieting, but in the back shed of a modest grain mill worker's house, tension built unseen. Anil Singh was 34, a man whose reputation was split between his reliability at the mill and his troubling hobby. To his neighbors and co-workers, he was steady, a man who put in long shifts grinding grain to provide for his wife and their 2 young children. But to those closest to him, Anil was stubborn, drawn to risk in ways that unsettled his family. He had taken to collecting snakes years earlier, calling it a symbol of luck and power. Despite his wife's disapproval, he kept them in small boxes stacked in a dark shed, boasting to co-workers that he could handle them without fear. It was a pursuit that fed his pride, even as it frayed the patience of those who cared for him. Handling snakes had become more than a pastime. It was his way of carving out a unique identity in a village where most lives looked the same. He told himself he understood their movements, that his experience gave him a mastery others lacked. That confidence made his decisions understandable, even if deeply flawed. He had survived so many close calls, so many brushes with striking hoods and bared fangs, that he convinced himself he could not be the one undone. The king cobra he kept was the largest snake in the shed, measuring over 11 feet. King cobras are the longest venomous snakes in the world, capable of raising a third of their bodies off the ground and delivering venom that attacks the nervous system, leading to paralysis and respiratory failure. Unlike smaller cobras, they do not rely on a single strike, but can deliver multiple bites in quick succession. Their hood display is not just for show. It is a defensive warning rarely ignored without consequence. Previously, neighbors had heard the hissing from the shed, urging Anil to let the animals go. A co-worker had walked away that very morning after watching him tap the cobra's hood with his fingers as if daring it to strike. Even his wife, standing often in the doorway, pleaded for him to stop. But to Anil, the repetition of these gestures without harm reinforced his belief that he had control. The risks were dismissed as the talk of people who did not understand. That evening, he decided to transfer the cobra into a sturdier wooden crate. His wife stood in the doorway, tense, repeating her pleas. His brother-in-law, visiting the house, lingered behind her uneasily. Anil used a pair of long tongs, lifting the snake from its box. At first, the cobra swayed, hood spread wide, body coiling against the steel grip. Then, with sudden precision, it twisted free and lunged, fangs driving deep into the back of his hand. He dropped the tongs instantly, grabbing his wrist, blood welling from the punctures. The snake struck again before he could retreat, sinking its fangs into his thigh as he stumbled back. His brother-in-law tried pulling him toward the doorway, but Anil's legs buckled, his face tightening with pain. His wife screamed as he collapsed onto the dirt floor, the cobra recoiling into the corner, still flared and watchful. Neighbors rushed over after hearing the commotion. With the help of 2 men, his brother-in-law dragged Anil out of the shed and into a cart. They pushed him quickly through the narrow streets to a government clinic 2 miles away. By then, his speech was already slurred, his body jerking uncontrollably. The clinic staff laid him on a cot and tried to stabilize him, but when asked about anti-venom, the nurse shook her head. Only basic medicines and intravenous fluids were available. King Cobra anti-venom was stocked only in larger hospitals hours away. Within 20 minutes of arriving, Anil's chest movements slowed to erratic gasps. His limbs stiffened in violent spasms before collapsing limp on the cot. Foam streaked his mouth and chin as his wife cried at his side, clutching his hand. The staff could only pronounce what had already become clear. Without anti-venom, there was nothing to stop the poison. He died moments later. The forest department arrived later that week, removing the surviving snakes and nailing shut the shed's doors. Notices were posted warning against private keeping of venomous animals, though most admitted such rules were rarely enforced. For his family, the loss cut deeper than any penalty. His wife abandoned the house entirely, moving with the children to her parents' home, leaving behind the dark shed that had come to symbolize his pride and his downfall. It was October 9th, 2013, in the Florida Everglades. The late afternoon light filtered weakly through thick clouds, casting long shadows over the wetlands. The canals were quiet, broken only by the drone of insects and the splash of fish. By nightfall, one of the day's surveys would end in tragedy, a mistake that others had warned against, but that unfolded too quickly to reverse. Laura Martinez was 29, a doctoral candidate at the University of Miami, focused on invasive reptile ecology. She was regarded by her professors as organized and persistent, though her classmates sometimes noted that she carried herself with an edge of impatience. Her notebooks were detailed, filled with data from dozens of Everglades field surveys she had led over the past 2 years. She had built her reputation on being reliable and ambitious, hoping to turn her thesis work into a career with the local wildlife commission. Handling large snakes was not her strongest skill, but she felt that demonstrating competence with field captures was essential for credibility. Laura's weekends were often spent balancing coursework with research trips into the wetlands. She logged long hours in the lab during the week and in the field on weekends, often at the expense of social time. Her motivation was clear. She wanted to show she could manage the dangers of invasive reptiles with the same confidence as seasoned trappers. The October trip was meant to be routine: survey a canal corridor, record sightings, and, if possible, attempt captures for tagging. She was joined by 2 classmates, both of whom trusted her judgment but remained uneasy about the risks. The Everglades that day were heavy with humidity, the air thick and still. Sawgrass bent sluggishly in the faint breeze, and the canal's water, dark with tannin, reflected the overcast sky. The first warning came when the students spotted movement along the bank. The snake was stretched beside a canal, its thick body patterned with dark blotches, head raised slightly above the grass. Burmese pythons, invasive to Florida since the 1980s, can exceed 18 feet and weigh over 150 pounds. They kill by constriction, tightening coils each time a victim exhales, crushing ribs and cutting off circulation. Though unprovoked attacks on humans are rare, any attempt to handle a python of that size carries serious danger. Field guidelines stress teamwork: 2 handlers for the body, 1 for the head, with all members prepared for sudden bursts of strength. One classmate hesitated, suggesting they record the sighting without attempting capture, but Laura argued that they had the opportunity to secure valuable data. The second warning was the snake's size, at least 16 feet, its girth too wide for one person to control. Yet Laura, intent on proving herself, volunteered to go for the head, while the others took the body. The third warning came from the python itself. When they edged closer, it shifted, muscles bunching beneath its scales. Still, they pressed on. Laura lunged, hands clamping just behind the snake's skull. Standard standard procedure for snake capture. For a split second, it seemed secure, but the python bucked violently, twisting its powerful neck free. Its body whipped sideways, knocking one student into the mud before surging back toward her. In an instant, coils wrapped around Laura's torso, driving her to the ground. Her classmates rushed forward, grabbing at the python's midsection, but its muscles flexed with astonishing force. The first coil crushed across her chest, forcing air from her lungs with a wet gasp. She tried to wedge her arms between her ribs and the tightening loop, but another coil locked around her waist, pressing her spine into the ground. Her breaths came shallow and fast, her voice straining in short bursts as the snake anchored her body against the canal edge. The python's head darted past her shoulder as its coils tightened rhythmically with each exhale. Her lips began to fade from pink to blue, her eyes bulging with strain. One classmate dug at the coils with both hands, while the other slashed at the snake's flank with a pocket knife. The shallow cuts leaked blood but did nothing to loosen its grip. The python shifted, tightening higher, a thick loop across her ribs and neck. Panicked, one of the students pulled out a phone and called emergency services, shouting into the receiver as the other fought to free her. Dispatchers confirmed help was on the way, but the location deep in the wetlands meant any response would take time. Laura's face darkened, her movements slowing. The students shouted, their voices breaking, but the only sound from her was a strained rasp as her chest collapsed inward. Another coil cinched her throat, tilting her head sideways. Her body convulsed briefly, then stilled, pinned beneath the crushing weight. The knife struck again and again, deeper this time, until the python recoiled slightly, its grip faltering. It slackened just enough for the classmates to pull her partly free, but by then she showed no signs of life. Arms limp, chest immobile, skin blanched. Emergency vehicles finally reached the canal edge nearly 40 minutes later, paramedics splashing through the sawgrass to where the students waited. Their equipment and compressions made no difference. Laura had been gone for some time. Her life ended long before help could arrive. For her classmates, the aftermath was immediate and scarring. Their accounts, recorded in incident reports, were consistent. The capture had been rushed, warnings ignored, and once the python coiled, the outcome was beyond their ability to reverse. In the weeks that followed, neither returned to the field. One withdrew from the graduate program entirely, while the other completed coursework but refused to take part in further surveys. The university later included the incident in field safety briefings, citing it as a case study on the consequences of overconfidence during animal handling. It was July 19, 2015, on the outskirts of Yangon, Myanmar. The sky was heavy with moisture after a long day of rain, and the fields glistened under a pale moon. What began as a routine check of irrigation would, within the hour, leave a family broken, and a community reminded of dangers they had long tried to warn against. Min Thu was 47, a rice farmer who had lived his entire life in the same village outside Yangon. He was known among neighbors for his tireless work ethic, often rising before dawn and returning to his small home late at night. His reputation, though, carried another trait, a stubborn dismissal of caution. Where others wore boots in the fields, he preferred to work barefoot, claiming he could feel the earth better. Warnings about snakes drew little more than a shrug. He told friends that he had been in the paddies since childhood and knew how to handle himself. For Min, farming was not just survival, but legacy. He had 3 children and wanted to leave them fertile land and a steady livelihood. His routines rarely changed. He checked dikes, repaired embankments, and walked the same muddy trails daily. That evening, a leaking ditch threatened to flood a section of the crop. Despite nightfall and wet ground, he insisted on going out to fix it. His teenage son carried a lantern behind him, reluctant but obedient. The decision made sense to Min. Delays risked crop damage, and he believed he could handle the field as he always had. Russell's vipers, common in Myanmar, thrive in farmlands and grasslands. Averaging 4 feet in length, they are stocky, with a distinctive chain-like pattern along their bodies. Unlike many snakes, they rely on ambush, coiling in grass and striking with little warning. Their venom is one of the deadliest in Asia, destroying blood's ability to clot and leading to rapid bleeding, organ failure, and often death within hours. Farmers are frequent victims, their bare feet and ankles easy targets. Several warnings had been given in the days prior. Villagers had killed a viper near the fields. Its body displayed displayed as a reminder. Neighbors told Min to wear shoes, or at least carry a stick to test the ground. Even his son hesitated, asking if they should wait until morning. But Min brushed off each concern, saying the snakes killed more rats than men, and stepped into the dark, wet field. They reached the embankment where the water was leaking, and Min crouched low to inspect it. His son held the lantern high, its beam cutting through the grass. Just as Min shifted his weight to step onto the ridge, movement stirred beside his bare ankle. A Russell's viper, coiled tightly in the grass, launched forward with terrifying speed. The first strike landed just above his ankle, fangs punching deep. Before Min could recoil, the snake struck again, sinking into nearly the same spot. His son shouted, the lantern shaking wildly as Min staggered backward. The snake retreated into the grass, its patterned body vanishing almost instantly. Min clutched his leg, gasping. Within minutes, symptoms began. His breaths grew shallow, and he dropped to his knees. His son tried to help him stand, but Min vomited into the dirt. His skin paled, sweat glistening across his forehead, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. He tried to steady himself, but his legs buckled. The boy sprinted back toward the village, screaming for help. Neighbors rushed, arriving to find Min convulsing in the mud. His gums bled openly, streaks of red down his chin. His skin began to blotch purple, swelling grotesquely around the bite. One man lifted him into a makeshift stretcher, but his body jerked violently, blood pooling beneath him as he thrashed. Attempts to calm him were useless. His veins were flooding with venom that shredded clotting factors, his body bleeding internally while swelling outward. The convulsions grew worse, his limbs striking the wood of the cart. Neighbors tried binding his leg with cloth, but the bleeding spread from his mouth and nose. His son clung to his side, sobbing, as Min's body seized again, then sagged heavily. For more than an hour they struggled to keep him stable as his condition deteriorated, but by the time they reached the edge of the village, his breathing had slowed to shallow gasps, then stopped entirely. He was dead. The neighbors lowered him from the cart onto the wet ground. Lantern light flickered across his body, already still, his chest unmoving. His son remained beside him, crying. In the days that followed, villagers avoided the section of field where Min had been bitten. Some carried sticks when walking near the paddies, striking the grass before each step. Children were told to stay off the embankments entirely, and men spoke in low tones about the sound of Min's convulsions echoing in their ears. The spot where he collapsed became a place people skirted after dark, a reminder carved into routine rather than into stone. For his family, every walk to the fields passed through an invisible boundary where work, memory, and fear could never again be separated. It was March 2nd, 2018, deep in the Amazon basin of Brazil. The rainy season had flooded the lowland forest, turning fields of tangled roots and understory into a maze of dark water. In the village along the riverbank, fishermen carried on their routines as they always did. But that afternoon, one of those routines would slip into disaster. Eduardo Pereira was 38, a subsistence fisherman who had lived his entire life on the river's edge. He was respected among neighbors for his steady hand with nets and his willingness to share catches with families in lean times. Eduardo's habits were shaped by the river. He rose before sunrise, checked lines, and often spent long hours in silence on the water. His strength was in consistency, though those close to him knew he also had a tendency to dismiss risks as exaggerations. He had grown up hearing stories of jaguars, stingrays, and snakes in the flood season, but he always said the river provided if one respected it, and that he knew its moods better than any outsider. Fishing was both survival and identity for Eduardo. With a wife and 2 children, his aim was simple: keep food steady and maintain the canoe and nets his father had passed down. During the high water months, fish often moved into flooded forest inlets, and nets snagged easily on submerged roots. The work was harder, the risks greater, but the catch was valuable. The inlet was still and oppressive, the canopy pressing close overhead. Branches drooped into water stained black with silt, and insects whined in dense clouds above the surface. Paddles dipped with muffled splashes as the canoe edged forward. In the shadows near the roots, water stirred in ripples that did not match the movement of fish. Green anacondas are among the heaviest snakes in the world, with females often exceeding 20 feet in length and weighing over 200 pounds. They are ambush predators, lying submerged with only eyes and nostrils above water. When prey passes, they strike with startling speed, wrapping massive coils around the body. Unlike venomous snakes, they kill by constriction, tightening with each exhale of the victim until breathing becomes impossible. Earlier, an older fisherman in the village had mentioned unusual splashing in side inlets and urged them not to set nets so deep. The cousins themselves joked about forest monsters when they saw ripples near the bank, but the laughter was uneasy. As they pulled closer to their snagged net, Eduardo waved away concerns, saying the movement was probably large catfish. He leaned out of the canoe with confidence, bracing one foot on the side and tugging at the mesh caught among submerged roots. The water erupted without warning. A massive green anaconda surged upward. In a blur, it wrapped around Eduardo's torso and yanked him from the canoe. The net slipped from his hands, the lantern glow vanishing into water as his body hit with a heavy splash. His cousins shouted, stabbing at the surface with paddles, but the snake coiled tighter, dragging Eduardo beneath. From above, they glimpsed chaos, Eduardo thrashing, arms clawing for air, his head jerking up once before vanishing. The coils spun him sideways, pulling him deeper. The water frothed with bubbles, then stilled for a moment, then broke again as his legs kicked wildly. His cousin screamed his name, but the only answer was the harsh slapping of water and the deep swirl of the snake tightening. One cousin leapt into the shallows with a machete, hacking blindly into the murk. He slashed at coils when they broke the surface, cutting shallow gashes that bled into the black water. Eduardo's face flashed into view once, contorted and desperate, eyes wide above the coils crushing his ribs. Then he was dragged under again. The machete struck water and scale, but the snake rolled, pinning Eduardo deeper into the mud. The struggle lasted only minutes, Eduardo's movements slowing quickly as the coils crushed tighter. His arms weakened, then stopped clawing altogether. The bubbles became fewer, then ceased. The cousins kept hacking, shouting, splashing, but the water swallowed their noise. When silence fell, the inlet seemed undisturbed again, save for faint ripples spreading outward. The snake's bulk disappeared into deeper water, carrying Eduardo with it. They waited, terrified, until at last the surface calmed entirely. Hours later, they returned with other villagers, probing with poles and dragging the area with hooks. When they finally brought Eduardo's body up, it bore the marks of the coils, deep bruises wrapping across his chest and arms, ribs crushed inward. Mud clung to his skin, his mouth open as if still gasping for air. The snake had begun to engulf his upper torso before retreating at the disturbance, leaving signs of partial swallowing but little progress. The villagers drove it off, but no one claimed to have seen it again. That night, Eduardo's family gathered by the riverbank. His canoe was draped with flowers, and candles flickered against the dark water. Neighbors stood in silence, offering food and support to his wife and children. There was little ceremony beyond presence, the river itself holding the memory of what had happened. Local authorities visited briefly, noting the attack but avoiding publicity. They told villagers that such events were rare, part of the forest's balance, and urged caution during high water months. For those who lived on the river, the warning was no revelation. They already knew the risks, and they knew Eduardo's death would be remembered less as an anomaly and more as another proof that even experience and confidence could falter against the hidden power of the flooded forest. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.